So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining the Kootenay Conservation Program's second Conservation Ambassador training. This three-part series is a new offering from KCP, and it's great to see so many familiar faces and a few new ones here today. My name is Marcy Marr, and I'm KCP's Stewardship Coordinator and will be the host for today's training. And Juliette Craig, KCP's Program Manager, is also here to ensure that our technology runs smoothly today, as well as other KCP staff, Nicole Trigg and Kendall Benesh. Given the rich heritage of stewardship in the Kootenay region, I'd like to acknowledge that KCP's work occurs in the traditional territories of the Ktunaxa, Secwepemc, Snakes, and Silks peoples who've lived here and stewarded the land and water for many generations. We're always very grateful to the funders and supporters of KCP, without whom we couldn't offer these types of programs. For those of you who are new to the Kootenay Conservation Program, or KCP, we're a broad partnership founded in 2002 and currently comprised of more than 80 land and water, conservation and stewardship groups, government agencies, resource industries, and agricultural producers working throughout the East and West Kootenays. Our mandate is to coordinate and facilitate conservation efforts on private land and to generate the support and resources needed to maintain this effort. A key aspect of conservation in the Kootenay region is private land stewardship. And KCP supports stewardship organizations that conduct landowner outreach by contributing technical and financial capacity, as well as opportunities for better coordination, effectiveness, and synergies. And these training sessions are born out of our commitment to be building stewardship capacity while creating a collaborative community of stewardship providers in the Kootenays. In 2017, KCP held two landowner outreach workshops, one in Cranbrook in the East Kootenay and the second one in Nelson in the West Kootenay, to identify the next steps for how stewardship could have greater conservation impact in our region. One of the recommendations was a toolkit that would serve as a one-stop shop for private landowners, local government planners, land managers, and stewardship practitioners to easily find information on organizations and programs in our area. In 2019, KCP completed the Stewardship Solutions Toolkit, both online and in print, featuring the programs and services that many of you provide. And thus far, the online toolkit is proving to be better than Google in helping people search and find local groups and resources, with over 1,000 unique visits in just the last year. The services are organized by 14 conservation neighborhoods, and when you click on each one, you're brought to a page of resources like this one for the Columbia Valley area, with over 24 organizations, services, and community-based water and wildlife monitoring opportunities. And each neighborhood has a list of services appropriate to that area. KCP is using the Stewardship Solutions Toolkit as a basis for the Conservation Ambassador training to help diversify knowledge within organizations and private land stewardship information that's available in the region. And in the spirit of cross-pollination, we began the training last week with Stewarding for Plants and Insect Biodiversity with Valerie Huff and Brenda Beckwith. And last week, many of you attended, and it was a really great training session. If you missed it, we've recorded it, and it will be available on KCP's website in mid-June. For today, we're focusing on stewarding for bird nesting and roosting habitat with Janice Arndt of the Kootenay Bank Swallow Survey and Verena Shaw of the Columbia Valley Swallow Project. And then next week, also on a Wednesday, June 9th, stewarding for water and wet habitats during climate change. And these stewardship trainings are designed to address several things, including why stewarding for plants and pollinators and bird nesting habitat and water and wetlands is important and can provide conservation benefits, what to look for on a property, how to use helpful search images, how to explore conservation starters with landowners, conversation on a particular topic, as well as practical things a landowner should know about stewarding land and water. Today's agenda will begin with a 30-minute presentation, followed by a question and answer session, which will be open to anything that you'd like to ask, either in the chat box or, as we said, raising your hand. And then you'll have some time in small breakout groups to get to know each other and deepen your learning. And then we'll reconvene and have some closing comments. And given our start today, we may run a little late, so I hope that works for everyone to stay on board with us. So I'd like to begin by introducing our presenters today. Janice Arndt is a wildlife biologist who's lived and worked and played in New Brunswick, Ontario, and British Columbia. She's made her home in the Kootenays for the past 20 years. Janice's current activities include managing the Kootenay Bank Swallow Survey and studying the ecology of butterflies. And accompanying Janice is Verena Shaw, who's a passionate naturalist. If you've ever been out with her, you know that, who's been deeply involved in learning about natural history for many years. She's a consultant with various conservation-related projects, primarily involving birds, but also inventorying Western painted turtles, monitoring river health, and other diverse projects. And she's currently project assistant for the Upper Columbia Swallow Habitat Enhancement Project, field technician for the Columbia Wetlands Marsh Bird Monitoring Project, and coordinates volunteers to report turtle sightings on artificial basking lots. Verena also collects local ecologically relevant reports for a public reference library for the Columbia Wetlands Stewardship Partners. A lot of her work focuses on citizen science projects, which she enjoys because they allow her to connect with people with nature. And so I will turn it over to you, Janice, to get us started. And thanks very much, Janice and Verena, for joining us today.
Well, good morning, and thanks so much for inviting us to speak this morning. You can go to the next slide. Next slide, very good. All right, we have the incredible privilege of living and working in the beautiful Kootenays. There's lots of open space, and for most of us, the escape from civilization to wilderness is within our reach in a matter of minutes. Why then do we need to be intentional about stewarding for bird nesting and roosting habitat on private land? Wildlife habitat stewardship is important because typically in the rugged terrain of the Kootenays, humans have built their homes, towns, ranches, and industry in the same valley bottom areas that are critical to many species. Next slide. This is Nelson, for those of you who aren't familiar. So not only have people built up in the flat bottom areas, but the soccer fields and the mall and the airstrip are actually all built into the lake. Crazy. From the grasslands in the East Kootenay to riparian deciduous habitat at creek deltas in the West Kootenay, low elevation habitats provide resources that in many cases allow for greater species richness and support sensitive species. Next slide. In addition, many birds use watercourses and valleys as corridors for migration and dispersal. Here in southeastern BC, we still have huge areas of wildland where birds and other animals can move freely. We can't take for granted there will always be enough. And so we must be intentional in accounting for the needs of wild species, particularly in areas of greater human impact. Landowners can contribute to reducing impact of development by taking steps to provide basic needs for birds on their properties. Next slide. There are dozens of at-risk birds and other sensitive species that spend significant parts of their annual cycle in the Kootenays. These include winter residents, spring and fall migrants, and birds that reproduce here. Many of these can be grouped based on significant aspects of their ecology. For example, one group consists of grassland-dependent birds such as long-billed curlew, bobolink, and short-eared owl. Other vulnerable groups are aerial insectivores such as swifts and swallows, or wetland obligate species like grebes, bitterns, and herons, and cavity-dependent birds such as woodpeckers and owls. We'll be discussing several of these birds and their critical requirements, as well as some more general aspects of maintaining or promoting species richness. Next slide. What should you be looking for in terms of bird habitat when you visit a property? Birds, like other animals, require the basics: food, water, shelter. Shelter or cover is important for protection from predators. In addition, most birds have specific needs for nesting. Some of these have already been mentioned: cavities, grasslands, and wetlands, and will be mentioned again due to their importance to sensitive species. Because birds are highly mobile, they are able to locate and move between these resources more readily than many other groups of organisms. Diversity in vegetation structure contributes to species diversity, as was mentioned by Brenda and Valerie last week, but in the case of birds, the scale is much greater. Next slide, please. An interspersion of open areas, trees, shrubs, and wet spots makes a perfect mix for many species. The greater diversity of vegetation types, the more insect food will be available, along with other foods such as seeds and berries. Riparian shrub areas are excellent for a wide variety of nesting songbirds. Old snags provide nesting and roosting habitat for a range of species, from owls to nuthatches and chickadees to woodpeckers. The critical feature of snags is the decaying wood, which aids in the creation of natural cavities and provides a softer substrate for those species that excavate their own cavities. Open areas such as fields and meadows support an abundance of rodents and insects that are prey for a multitude of birds. And over to Verena. What else do you look for on a property?
So, what else do you look for on a property to assess bird habitat? Grasslands and open fields are excellent for bird habitat. Several bird species like to nest here, such as species at risk like long-billed curlews and bobolinks. Look for birds on fields or fence posts, on the ground and on top of grasses, on dead tree snags, especially with holes. Look at shrubs and trees on the edge of open areas where birds can be found. And look for bird nests in many of these places as well. Next slide. Wetlands. Many bird species use wetlands, whether it be for nesting, like this trumpeter swan, or resting during migration. Here in the Columbia wetlands, there have been 163 species counted using the wetlands and area, with 30 species considered at risk. Look for areas of water, cattails, reeds, currant nests, old nests in shrubs like willows, and even floating nests in the water. Next slide. Outbuildings. Look for birds and nests, old or new, outside on buildings or in structures open to the elements, such as barns or disused buildings. Barn swallows will often nest on human-made structures, such as the ones in these pictures. Next slide. Heron rookeries. Herons nest together in colonies, which are called rookeries. Great blue herons are at risk, and one of the Stewardship Solutions projects asks people to send in their heron congregation or heron nesting sightings. This is a picture of what a heron rookery looks like. Next slide. Bridges. Birds such as cliff swallows and barn swallows nest under bridges, large or small bridges. Look for nests such as this cliff swallow nest, which is in the picture, or actually there's several nests. It looks like there's 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 7 nests in this picture. The nests will be reused over time, but unfortunately, sometimes these nests are removed by people who find them to be a nuisance. Next slide. Conversation starters with a landowner or manager. This was an interesting thing for me to be asked to talk about, because I automatically look around to see if I can find something that is interesting from a natural history perspective whenever I'm on someone's land. And with the owner, I'm always looking to share some interesting nature tidbit. If I see something that looks like bird habitat, such as an old nest in a building, or a snag, or some bird song or a bird, I will happily let the landowner know. And if their response is less than excited, I don't pursue it. But I find more often than not, people are interested in learning more, and then I go from there. If you've ever been out with me, you know that sometimes in the middle of a conversation, I'll just stop listening and then I will just hear a bird singing. And then I'll draw attention to the bird, and then we'll go back to the conversation. But it's like any topic, you'll know if people are interested or not. Next slide, please. So for instance, with this picture of a Lewis's woodpecker in its nesting cavity, I had found this nest last year when I was going on a walk in my neighborhood. I could see the nesting area from the road. On this piece of private land, there is a small grove of deciduous trees with cavities around a pond. I found several different bird species nesting in these cavities, one of which was Lewis's woodpeckers, American kestrels, and northern flickers. And then one day this spring, I was again walking in this area. This is before the birds came back, and I saw the landowners. And I had heard that they were planning to build a house on this property. And I was concerned about the trees being removed. So I started talking to them, and I told them that I'd found a rare woodpecker nesting in one of their trees last year, as well as other bird species, and asked them if they were planning to leave the trees. Luckily, they seemed very excited by this and said that they were planning to leave the trees, and especially now that they knew that these nesting birds were there. And I'm hoping that now that the Lewis's woodpeckers are back at this site, I've found 5 of them so far, that one day I'll be able to run into the landowners again, and I'll be able to talk to them about what these birds look like, because they're really beautiful. So had they not been thrilled with this idea, I would have asked them at least not to cut the trees down during nesting season, as it is illegal to do so, especially with an endangered species such as this Lewis's woodpecker. But so far I have not run into this situation. Next slide, please. In another situation, I had asked a landowner permission to access his land for a bird walk I was leading. While I was there, I found several bobolinks, one of which is seen in this picture, which are also endangered in his open field. I let him know and asked him if he'd be interested in seeing this endangered bird, which he was. And he told me that he would be haying and asked me how long the bobolinks would be there nesting. And after seeing the bobolinks, he decided that he would wait until later in the season to hay in that particular area. Bobolinks can have a hard time nesting, as they nest in open fields because of their nests being destroyed during haying. Just as a little aside, bobolinks are really cool songbirds because they have the longest migration of any North American songbird. They actually winter in Argentina and Brazil. Next. Some practical things a landowner should know about stewarding, nesting, and roosting habitats. Next. So several local bird species will use nest boxes. Birds such as mountain and western bluebirds, tree swallows, American kestrels, and various cavity nesting ducks are the most common. There are many good nest box plans online. One thing I would say is if you put up nest boxes, please clean out the nest boxes yearly in fall or early spring, because otherwise birds will just keep building nests on top of each other. And this could not only produce disease and parasites, but if the nests are high enough and close enough to the nesting hole, it could be an increased risk for predation. Next slide, please. So this is a picture of a duck nest box. And if you do install boxes for ducks, putting up predator controls like this one is a really good idea. And also for duck nest boxes, note that they should have some fresh material like wood chips that you should put in each year, because they will not add any material themselves. And for other nest boxes, watch for enlarged holes made by squirrels around the cavity over time, and make the holes small enough so that invasive species like European starlings don't nest in them. Next. Wetlands. Keep wetlands intact or restore damaged wetlands, such as this picture on the right, which is a local wetland that was unfortunately destroyed by off-road vehicles. Wetlands are really important habitat for many different species of birds. Next. Leave trees standing, especially during nesting season, as many birds, such as this Lewis's woodpecker, nests in the holes. Next. This is a picture of a long-billed curlew in a local rancher's field. And if possible, consider haying later in the season for at least the part of a field where you see birds such as this curlew or bobolinks, both of which are endangered and nest in fields. And now I will pass it back to Janice.
Thanks. An important factor to be aware of when planning activities on private property is the timing of bird nesting events. Although protecting birds is an important consideration at any time of year, they are particularly vulnerable during nesting because they are connected to a particular place, and adults are reluctant to flee in the face of danger. If a bird's breeding attempt fails, it may not be able to re-nest, and its reproductive success for the entire year could be zero. Some birds in some situations are able to produce a replacement clutch, but for many, their eggs are literally all in one basket. Nest failure can be caused directly by destruction of a nest or from indirect effects, such as disturbance that prevents them from defending the nest or from warming their eggs or feeding dependent chicks, as well as increased exposure to predation risk. Therefore, the timing of potentially destructive activities can be of critical importance in responsible stewardship. Examples of such activities are haying, as mentioned by Verena, digging ditches, removing danger trees, as well, was mentioned by Verena, or constructing a new outbuilding. The Migratory Bird Convention Act protects all migratory birds, as well as their nests and eggs. Most birds and nests that are not covered by the MBCA are protected by the BC Wildlife Act. Many people don't intuitively consider that birds have finite nesting periods and that those periods can vary by species in length as well as the time of year. There are two tools, one which is general, the other specific, that are useful for reducing risk of disturbance to nesting birds by providing information on the likelihood that nests or eggs would be present at a given time or place. Next slide, please. The first tool is Environment Canada's General Nesting Periods of Migratory Birds resource. The aim is to allow you to determine when migratory birds might be nesting so that you can plan your activities to reduce the risk of harming migratory birds. Just a quick look here at what you'll see when you go to their website. You can use this resource anywhere in Canada. The country is divided into nesting zones, which are based on latitude, elevation, spring and summer temperatures, and other factors, all of which affect the timing of nesting of migratory birds. The Kootenays are in nesting zones A2 and A3. Next slide, please. So this is what the nesting calendars look like. The darker red is when most species are nesting. It's broken down into categories of wetland species, open species, like open habitat species, and forest. So you can tell that most birds are nesting between April and the end of July, Next slide. The second resource is the nesting calendar query tool provided by Birds Canada and their Project NestWatch. This tool provides species-specific nesting calendars. In this example, I queried the database by ecoregion. You can also query for individual species. You can email me for the steps I use to construct this particular list, which encompasses the Kootenays, or just play around to find what you're looking for. Again, denser colors mean there's a greater likelihood of disturbing nesting birds and disrupting their breeding. In summary, use the general tool for avoiding risk of disturbance to the broadest range of species, or use the query tool if there is a particular species you know or suspect is nesting in or near the targeted work area. For example, you might suspect a saw-whet owl is nesting in a stand of aspens that needs to be taken down and want to know when it would be safe to do so. Or a harrier has eggs in the far corner of a pasture, or perhaps you know there's a catbird in your hedgerow that you want to be modified. These charts are interesting and useful even apart from their value in helping landowners to avoid disturbance to nesting birds. Let them enhance your appreciation for the breeding birds in our region and fuel your curiosity about their life histories. Next slide, please. What should you do if you discover a nest containing eggs or young? And how should you advise a landowner? First, halt all disruptive activities in the nesting area. Move away as quickly and quietly as possible. Avoid disturbing the surrounding vegetation, including inadvertently trampling a path that leads to the nest. You should create a no disturbance buffer zone around the nest. Generally, the size is guided by the size of the bird. And avoid the immediate area until the young have naturally left the vicinity of the nest. Just a few miscellaneous reminders for maintaining bird diversity on any property, yours or someone else's. Retain riparian shrubs, hedgerows, and snags when it's safe to do so. Don't use pesticides. Be aware of ways to reduce window kills, and keep your cats indoors. Let's now turn our attention to some of the stewardship solutions on the KCP Toolkit. And as we do, we'll continue to look at opportunities to steward well for birds. Next slide, please. Many of the bird programs on the Stewardship Solutions Toolkit have inventory and monitoring as their focus. Knowing where sensitive species are breeding is an important step to protecting their habitat. Nocturnal Owl Survey is coordinated by Birds Canada and aims to monitor trends in owl populations through nighttime road-based surveys along fixed routes. In the southern interior, these surveys are conducted in March. Preliminary results from the 2021 survey season, provided by Graham Sorensen as of mid-May, included detections of 111 owls on 51 routes. Great horned owls were detected most frequently, followed by northern saw-whet owls and barred owls. Smaller numbers of western screech, barn, northern pygmy, boreal, and long-eared owl were detected. Next slide. Okay, we seem to be missing a photo there, that's okay. Species at risk in the Kootenays include two small cavity nesting species, flammulated owl and western screech owl, both of which are so uncommon I don't have photos of them. So I've substituted a northern pygmy owl photo. Northern pygmy owls are commonly seen in the Kootenays in winter, but it is quite uncommon to find a nest site. Like pygmy owls, the flammulated and the western screech owl use cavities for nesting. Flammulated owls are found in drier coniferous and mixed forests, usually in older Douglas fir forests with ponderosa pine present. Western screech owls are most likely to be found in riparian woodlands. Western screech owl typically uses deciduous trees for nest sites, while flammulated are more likely to be found in conifers. Both these species will also use nest boxes. Next slide, please. The bank swallow is formally listed as threatened under the Federal Species at Risk Act. I initiated the Kootenay bank swallow survey in 2015 to address information gaps regarding the status and distribution of breeding colonies in southeastern BC. We combine data collection through formal surveys with information solicited from birders and naturalists. There are now 175 confirmed active sites in the database, which have been documented between 2015 and 2020. Dozens more locations are known to hold potential as active colonies. The species has very specific nesting requirements. Next slide, please. Vertical banks with substrate that is loose enough to excavate, yet firm enough to maintain integrity throughout the nesting cycle. Typically, bank swallows use sparsely vegetated banks near water. Suitable banks may become occupied overnight. Next slide. I have been surprised by some of the sites that are chosen based on their apparently high level of disturbance. This may seem to suggest that they're really quite adaptable, but more likely their priority needs are for a specific substrate type and food availability, and perhaps prime undisturbed locations are limiting. Since birds can quickly colonize a suitable vertical slope, managers of sand or gravel extraction operations must be proactive in avoiding harm. Operators are encouraged to exercise proper slope management, which typically involves contouring aggregate piles to less than 70 degrees at the end of each workday during the breeding season, if they wish to prevent swallows from colonizing. Next slide, please. Alternatively, land managers open to stewarding for bank swallows can provide breeding habitat and a portion of the operation away from the noise and disturbance of ongoing extraction. This is being done at the Udishenya landfill in Castlegar, where the operator is keen to manage for this species. In addition to requirements for nesting, as aerial insectivores, bank swallows need access to foraging areas with high numbers of flying insects. They commonly feed over grasslands, pastures, and ponds. Next slide, please. I've been involved with a group of volunteers which has been monitoring osprey numbers in the West Kootenay for 20 years. Our study area included only a portion of Kootenay Lake, the West Arm. And in 2015, Friends of Kootenay Lake Stewardship Society expanded the study to include the entire main lake, so the North and South Arms, which are much larger. This update is from their annual report. Ospreys are excellent bioindicators and worldwide sentinel species for aquatic ecosystem health due to their sensitivity to environmental pollutants and exclusive diet of fish. Next slide. 2020 marked year 5 of the Friends of Kootenay Lakes Osprey Monitoring Project. 104 osprey and bald eagle nests were checked, covering around 250 kilometers of the main body of the lake by boat. Birds were observed at 54 nesting sites, with many containing nestlings or fledglings. 3 new osprey nests were found and will be added to the growing data set. Next slide, please. Across the Kootenays, ospreys readily use human structures, and sometimes their choice of site is not the best. In these cases, an alternate site may be provided and is often used. Landowners may choose to provide a platform simply for the joy of having this iconic bird on their property. A few basic tips for placing a new platform include choosing an open area near or over water at a height that extends above surrounding trees and pilings. Now over to Verena for more on the stewardship solutions.
Next slide, please. Last year, in 2020, I was involved with the Columbia Valley Swallow Project as project assistant for local biologist Rachel Darville through Wildsite Golden. In a nutshell, this project identified and monitored 2 species at risk, bank swallow colonies and barn swallow nest sites, with the help of volunteers and the public. We also kept track of cliff swallow nesting sites, as although these are not currently considered endangered birds, they are thought to be in decline. We found many bank swallow colonies in the clay banks along Columbia Lake and Lake Windermere. With the barn swallows, we found several significant nesting sites as well as individual ones in the Columbia Valley. Next slide. This year, again, I'm project assistant for Rachel Darville through Wildsite Golden, and this year the project is called the Upper Columbia Swallow Habitat Enhancement Project, which is quite a mouthful. This is the first year of a 5-year project with both bank and barn swallows again. We are continuing to monitor the colonies and nesting sites we found last year. And we're also creating some artificial nesting structures for bank swallow colonies, as well as nesting structures and some wooden nesting cups for barn swallows. For me, a lot of this project revolves around coordinating volunteers who monitor the swallows, as well as some field surveys and handling the data that is generated. I am not involved with the nesting structure aspect of this project, so any questions about this can be directed to Rachel, and I'll be giving you her contact information and further information at the end of this project, or the end of this talk. Next slide, please. A bit about barn swallows. They're endangered and have decreased in the past 40 years by about 76% in Canada. They nest on ledges, rafters, machinery, or light fixtures. Barn swallows will reuse their nests year after year. Unfortunately, they have a bad reputation due to their messy nesting habits and will sometimes have their nests removed, which is illegal to do. Barn swallows are great birds to have around as they eat about 850 insects a day. Next slide, please. For 3 years, from 2017 to 2019, I was a field technician subcontractor in the Columbia Wetlands Marshbird Monitoring Project with Rachel Darville's company, Golden Eye Ecological Services. This project was through the Canadian Wildlife Service. And I will be involved again during this month as a last-minute project. In fact, my first survey for the season will be early tomorrow morning. What this project consists of briefly is monitoring several routes on land and by kayak in the Columbia wetlands. 5 marsh bird species are targeted during the breeding season: Sora, Virginia rail, American bittern, American coot, and pied-billed grebe, although all other birds seen and heard during the surveys are also noted. All of these 5 species were heard and seen in varying degrees during the project. I know Janice has also been involved in the marsh bird monitoring, but in the West Kootenays. Next slide, please. The Canadian Nightjar Survey. So for several years, while I was living in the West Kootenays, I was involved with looking for common nighthawks, which is also a species at risk. This was a volunteer position through Birds Canada and consisted of doing an evening point count once a year in early summer on a specific driving route to see if any nighthawks could be detected. Because of their nocturnal habits, not much is known about nightjars, of which the common nighthawk is one. There are several routes available to volunteers in the East and West Kootenays. And if you want to find out more about this project and maybe become a volunteer yourself, I've added this information at the end of this talk. Next slide. So although I have not been involved with this project, I can talk a little bit about it. Because great blue herons are in decline and are on the endangered list, Marlene Mackmer, who is a West Kootenay biologist and heads this project, has asked the public to report heron nests or groups of great blue herons to help monitor breeding and overwintering populations and identify sites worthy of conservation or stewardship follow-up. There's a great brochure on the KCP website, which I have linked to as well. Next slide. And this is my contact information and resources page. So if you have any questions when you're out in the field, please feel free to contact me. And this is my email address. I'm really happy to help. I'd love to hear from you. And then links to the programs I spoke about. I guess in this slide, you won't actually get the links, but I'm sure the links can be provided to you after. And any questions about swallow enhancement structures or the Marshbird survey program, please contact Rachel at racheldarville@gmail.com. And that's it for me. Thank you so much. And now I will pass it back to Janice.
Yeah, all that's left for me is my contact slide here. So there's my information. It's kind of small. You can also find it on the KCP website. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Janice and Verena. And we'll move into question and answers. And if you want to look in the gallery view, that would be helpful so we could see hands. If you want to see faces and hands. So if you have a question, use the reaction there. Is a raised hand function under reactions in your toolbar, or put it in the chat box. And let me see. So we have a little conversation going on here between Kendall and Sally Hammond. So Kendall's curious at how small a nest box hole needs to be in order to deter the European starlings from using them. So Sally's response was that they glue a metal washer around the hole, which helps it from being enlarged. And maybe Janice and Verena, you have ideas as well?
I off the top of my head, I don't have that number, but I think it's easily available online. What size, how small it needs to be to exclude starlings. Another thing I've done is I've cut out the bottom of a tin can and put that around the hole. But a washer is great too.
Yeah. Any other questions out there?
Huh.
Go ahead, Verena.
Oh, I was just saying those are great ideas. It's something I hadn't thought about. I know one of the local ranchers puts an excluder on the nest boxes, but I'm not sure of the size of that.
On that same note, there really is no need for a perch on the outside, and in fact that increases predation risk. So leave the perch off.
Okay. I see two hands up. So let's go Kate McKenzie and then Dave Zender. So if you want to unmute yourself, Kate? Great.
Thanks, you guys, for a great presentation. I was just wondering if either of you have any experience using nest boxes for Lewis's woodpecker. Just any thoughts you might have on that, or if there's any evidence out there that they actually use nest boxes. Thanks.
Go ahead, Verena.
I've done some nest box monitoring for Lewis's woodpeckers, and I have not found them to use any of the boxes. But I have an interesting story about a landowner in Fairmont. There seems to be quite a few Lewis's woodpeckers there. And the landowners had a tree, a snag, and the Lewis's woodpeckers would nest in there year after year. It was in front of their house. And one year, I think it was last year, there was a big windstorm and it knocked off the top part of the tree. And they were not sure what they should do about it. And so what they ended up doing is they took another snag and they actually braced it on top of the tree that had the top blown off. And then they created a hole in that tree in the hopes that the Lewis's woodpeckers would come back. And in fact, they did come back, but they created their own nesting hole. And so it kind of makes me wonder if they just like to create their own holes or at least modify them, because I know that they do use other holes. So yeah, I haven't had any success with seeing the Lewis's woodpeckers using the boxes, unfortunately.
Okay, and Dave, would you like to ask your question? Unmute yourself.
Yeah, sure, thanks. Kate, just we had a project on our ranch and we put up a bunch of boxes for the Lewis's woodpeckers. And So far, they don't seem to be nesting in them, though we have pictures of them checking them out. So maybe it'll happen at some point. But I think the design that we got came from Montana, where I think they have successfully used boxes. So I'm not sure if we didn't make them completely correctly or why they're not selecting them. But anyway, that's a personal experience with that. I just had a question. We currently have 2 pairs of barn swallows nesting under the eave on our house. And I'm just wondering about how much time from the point of making the nest to the fledgling stage we should expect not to use that entrance and kind of try and keep stuff away from there.
That's a good question. I know that we monitor the we monitor the nests until August sometime, but of course they wouldn't use the same nest until that time. But they will often nest again after their first clutch. So I'm not really sure offhand, but I can find out for you if you want and get back to you.
Great. So other questions out there, and I should also prompt you folks to know that we have who are asking questions. Go into that. There are some beautiful cards that we've spoken about. Rachel Darville, Verena mentioned her mother Donna Mendez as photos, and just beautiful that. Things up at the Art Gallery of Golden, and we have a few of those cards set aside for someone from this particular training session. So we have about 5 more minutes of questions before we're going to do breakout groups. And so, yeah, hopefully we'll have a few more good questions here for Verena and Janice. Suzanne, you've got your hand up.
Yes, I was wondering, what do you recommend to farmers and property owners when they have a lot of feral cats? That's, I see some of the properties I go to, I know that they're just having a lot of outdoor feral cats, and they do kill a lot of birds. How do you broach that conversation?
Yeah, that's a tough one because of course they want them for rodent control, correct? Yeah. So that is a tough one. I wonder if they are aware of the damage to birds as well as rodents, or if they actually see the damage that is done to wild birds.
I don't know, but I do know we have a person here right on the riparian, and they have like 100, and finally they were reported, and the SPCA came and took a bunch of them away and helped control them for a while. But of course they just let them breed and have more. I mean, they put out bags and bags of food. It's common around here.
They put out food for them.
Oh yeah, and but just let them go wild. So yeah.
It seems like a problem, kind of a complex problem with not an easy answer. I wasn't aware of that. I don't think that happens in the West Kootenay.
Okay, I see in the chat box that Wendy has a request, wondering if Janice's slide that shows the different nesting types could be reshown. Juliet, I don't know which slide number that is.
It's the one with the blue.
Okay.
So
I was at, yeah.
It's just a screenshot, so it's only shows a portion of the species. But go ahead, Wendy.
I was actually wanting to see if you would be willing to share that slide. I think I would find it helpful in some of the work that we do here on reserve.
Yeah, I'll send the link. Unfortunately, the search I do doesn't come up as a website address. So I would have to take you through the steps to find the list for the Kootenays, and I can do that. I'm happy to do that.
Is this the right slide, Janice, or are you wanting, do you mean the chart?
She's looking for the nesting charts.
Yeah, yeah.
But that's something I can send. I can, I guess, get your email address, Wendy, from
Okay.
Juliet.
There we go, Juliet.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that would be fabulous.
Sure. And what did you say you were going to use it for, Wendy?
Well, it's just going to help guide some of the work that we're doing on reserve. Just having some sort of chart to kind of look at and plan around so that we're not having an impact on any nesting species.
Yeah, that's awesome. Great.
Okay, folks, I think it's going to be time for breakout groups. So what we have, let's see, we're first going to do an exercise called the before breakout groups. And the question that I would like you all to reflect on and then answer in a speech bubble using the Mentimeter tool. With Juliet will put the link in the chat and she'll also talk to us a bit about it before we do this, but just as a heads up. So given the discussion that we've had here this morning, is there anything that you'd like to incorporate into your work? Okay, so given what I just learned, what could you incorporate into your work? And then when you go back to the Zoom window, you'll see the little speech bubbles come by. Oh, these are great ideas. Okay, and then when you're ready, come back to Zoom so you can see the speech bubbles if you haven't already. And so the thinking that you just did and answering this question, we're going to now move you into breakout groups automatically. And you'll be discussing your answer to this question, and there may be other answers that you come up with, in addition to why is it important and how will you do it? Have fun breakout groups, and we'll see you back in the main session. Hey everyone, welcome back. Hopefully that adjustment wasn't too abrupt coming out of your breakout groups, but I hope you had a great conversation, got to meet some new people. Sorry for the two folks that we moved so soon, but we realized you were in a breakout group of two, and hopefully Kate, you just flew to the next group and it all worked out and you landed well and people received you in the nest of that conversation. So we have a couple of quick things that we want to do just to begin to wrap this up, and Juliet's going to walk us through again back to Mentimeter. And go ahead, Juliet.
Yes, so if you can go back to that Mentimeter link, we're going to have 3 questions for you. The first is the first question that you had before, but now given your discussion, is there anything else you could incorporate into your work? So if you've left Mentimeter, go back to menti.com and type in the code 9297-1295. And you should see a new slide. And if you're stuck on the old slide, there might be a submit or a move forward button that will get you to this new slide. Given your discussion, is there anything else you could incorporate into your work? So someone's found us there, so this one's open. We'll give this a couple of minutes for you to reflect on your discussion, and then we'll go to the next question. And if you want to see the answers, you can go back to the Zoom window and the answers are popping up. We'll just give this another minute.
They should stay in Menti in terms of not exiting out to get to the next question, right, Juliet? There'll be a next question prompt there. So keep that window open for those of you toggling between Zoom and Menti on your desktop.
Great ideas. Okay, I'll show the next question. Just to ask about the timing of the sessions, if we run this series again, was this amount of time too long, too short, or about right? And please be candid. We don't see who answers what. And then we know for our next time. And we will do a longer survey after the sessions to get a bit more information from you. And then the last question about the value of this session for you and your work. And again, we don't see who answers what, so just be honest and give us the feedback. And I'll pass it over to you, Marcy.
Great. So thank you, everyone. And sorry again for any technical difficulties getting us started here. And thanks for hanging in with us. This has been a great day of learning. It's been really nice to see all of you and great information from Janice and Verena. So I have an assignment for you. As you know, we're trying to encourage everyone to be learning more about the Stewardship Solutions Toolkit. So we have a bit of a challenge. If you could go on to the Stewardship Solutions Toolkit, which is on KCP's website, kootenayconservation.ca, and go to your area or an area you work in or an area you're interested in knowing more about, and pick 3 stewardship solutions that you don't know much about, that you might be interested in or intrigued by, and get to know that website a bit more and some of the providers out there. Again, part of our goal here is to create a community of practitioners that know what each other's doing and be able to call on each other, build teams. So anyway, that's my my assignment for you guys. And I hope you'll take me up on it. And again, just want to thank you for your time, and we will see you next Wednesday. And we'll be talking about water and wetlands with Georgia Peck and Camille LeBlanc. And have a great Wednesday, and we'll see you next week, everyone. Bye.